Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. My guest today has quite a story of tragedy and love and healing to share with you. My guest today is Ambyr Rose, and she is a non-denominational worship leader and singer. And she has had incredible, profound loss. Three, actually, since 2016. She lost her partner to a drug overdose in 2016. She lost her brother in a very tragic way. He had PTSD and was killed by the police. And in 2021, she lost her 6-month-old nephew to negligence at daycare. And so I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Ambyr, because I know that each one of these losses would be so hard on their own, but at a loss for words because you've had three such significant losses. And I look forward to our conversation in hearing how you have dealt with the magnitude of what you've been through. You can see I'm having a hard time even articulating what it is
You're okay. I appreciate that you're willing to have this conversation with people, because I think for a long time we've not articulated what grief looks like in just horrific tragedies. And it's so important that you're doing this to allow people to grieve openly and see other people that are openly grieving and living their lives anyway, moving forward. I think this is incredible what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, because I think that what I'm taken aback by in terms of your story is that each of these losses were just so tragic, the way each of them died. So I'm not even sure where you would like to start with this story. Maybe you could talk a little bit about each one of these people that meant so much to you, and then we can see where that takes us. How does that sound?
Absolutely. The first one that was really just devastating for me, kind of put me in a bit of a comatose state, really. I was a zombie mode when my partner passed. I had experienced hardships before, as everybody has, just challenging situations and hard things that you figure your way through, or you have a great support system to help you get through. But when Jordan died, I had never had my world just stop like that before. I had a hard time getting out of the house. The grief process was so different than any other challenge I had faced previously. My world just stopped. Jordan was incredible, I have to say. He was an addict that struggled for about 10 years. Actually, a little more than 10 years. I think I was only part of 10 years of it. And he would go through a cycle. And if anybody listening has been through a partnership with an addict, you know how the cycle goes, as far as sober living back into that temptation, where sometimes you will hit that relapse with them, and they have to go back through therapy and rehab and sober living again and a halfway house. And especially if they've been through that cycle enough times, they've run out of people that they haven't burned bridges with to be able to go stay with. They've run out of people that maybe they haven't stolen from yet, or that they haven't broken trust with. And especially when you've been working with an addict long enough, you know how careful you have to be. And you really, as hard as it is, you do have to let them go through this process so that you can retain what relationship you have left between you two as they work towards trying to get sober and trying to beat this demon. And for him, it was just so powerful. He was adopted from overseas. He really was something he ran to in his grief over the unknowns in his life. And it was just something he could not say no to. We had this running joke that I told him one of these days that he would pass out doing whatever he was doing. He would wake up with a tattoo on his arm that said, "Not even once." Because he would tell himself that even after being sober for a year, for 2 years, that he could just do it just once, just to taste, just to take the edge off. Because even sober, he was always craving. He was always thinking about it. And it was always something that, it was a daily battle. He had to wake up and fight and win. And, after a while, he would get to the point where he would tell himself, one time I could celebrate, or I could just take the edge off, or I'm just having a really bad day and this would really help, kind of thing. So we would joke about it. I never actually did it. I probably should have, but I never did.
So Amber, I just want to stop for a second. Did you meet your partner when he was sober, or?
I did. I did not realize his history. He had actually just come out of rehab, I think a couple months prior, for cocaine use. And so he was clean and sober. Yeah. That's the Jordan that I met. Powerful, charismatic, handsome. Oh my goodness. He easily was probably the only person in a room that people would look at. Like I was just invisible, compared to just how gorgeous he was. I should have sent you a picture so you could just see just how stunning he was. And it was incredible to think that someone as beautiful as him, as charismatic, as intelligent as he is, struggled with this demon that just wouldn't let him go.
And that's often the case, right?
Yeah. And that was actually what really got him in the end. He went from cocaine to pill use, went from pill use to heroin use. And then this was in 2016 when we were just starting to, at least for us as a small town, we were just starting to hear about fentanyl getting cut into different drugs or laced into different things. It just wasn't anything we had a huge knowledge about or huge danger signals about. It wasn't a conversation that was really happening until people just started dropping. And we started finally hearing why, but Jordan was one of the first in the area. And he was in a halfway house after getting sober, after successfully completing rehab again. And there was a dealer that just kept coming by the halfway house offering. And I think this was either the second or third time this dealer had been by this house. And I think Jordan must have just told himself, just once, just one time. It's not going to matter.
Just one more time.
But with the fentanyl and with him most likely trying to go back to his normal dose before he was sober, they said he immediately and he had locked himself in the bathroom. They had to break down the door. They tried to bring him back, but he had been gone so long, he wasn't there anymore.
Sorry.
It was so hard to walk with somebody that long, to work with them, to love them so long through something like that, and to lose them to something so. I really have to work on cleaning up my language because there's this, especially when I talk about addiction, there's something in me that just wants to drop F-bombs.
Me too. I'm the same way.
Yes.
I know. I told
So
you before we started recording, the story is getting so old because me alone knows. So I know this story, and I've had two people on. I've had two guests, maybe even more, who both lost their sons, young sons, to fentanyl, both in recovery. And they did that one more time thing. And it's an epidemic in our country of how many people are dying from drugs laced with fentanyl. And I've mentioned it before. I'm going to mention it again, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that it's heroin. It's not just heroin.
No.
These young people are taking a Xanax. But then what was shocking to me is I was reading an article about these two young girls. They were in college, I believe, and they ate gummy bears, and the gummies were laced with fentanyl. I'm sorry, but I would never think that a pot gummy would be laced with fentanyl, no. But it's everywhere now. It's terrifying. Parents have to know, kids have to know that no drug is safe off the street. They're not safe, period. I don't care what it is. So.
Agreed. And these dealers are very persistent and, to use an antiquated word, wily. They're cunning. And the number of times that they're willing to get told no before they get that yes is just astounding to me. And this guy was very persistent. I think Jordan was the second body attached to that dealer at that point before they caught him. And it's just,
yeah,
it makes me so angry. It makes me so angry. You walk with somebody so long. And this was part of that grief process that I think I was talking about earlier. You know, my mom actually had to kind of drag me out of my house. I was just, after I think 6 or 7 months, I couldn't function. I couldn't go out into the community and do the community volunteer projects or the music things or the theater projects or any of the events that I normally would have got out and done. But my world just
Stopped. I totally understand what you mean. That's exactly what it was like when my brother died. It really is. It's like you're driving a car 150 miles
in a train.
into a brick wall and you just,
Yeah.
were you a worship leader at that time?
So I wasn't a leader at that time. I was leading, but there was no title. I was part of actually a different church than I am now. And they were so wonderful to try to come alongside. And I'm afraid I just fell off the face of the planet at that point. They were great about checking on me, but I had such a hard time picking up my phone. I had such a hard time looking at social media. But the only place I could be was in my house with all those memories of him. And it was just, I stopped singing, I think, for probably 2 years after that. I just couldn't even and that's been one of my primary identities, has been a singer ever since I got out of college, actually, and realized I could sing. And there's something about finding that joy in that was painful. It felt wrong. It felt as if I was sullying his memory by being happy doing something. And for me, that's where music was. Worshiping is something that just makes me so happy. But worshiping for me also through music is a conversation with God. And I was so flipping angry. I could not even think about going into worship. So I had a friend of mine from another church at that time that knew I had dropped off the planet, and that wasn't me. To drop out of church, let alone drop out of community events and the volunteer positions and just not keep my obligations that I'd had, that wasn't like me. And people were very forgiving because that wasn't like me. But I had a friend from another church that reached out that I played volleyball with. And I love supporting other organizations. For me, there's no, well, you go here to this church, so you don't associate with any others. That's never been for me. I love anyone who serves people. I don't care what you call yourself. As if you love people and you serve them as best you can, let's do it together. If we can, let's find a way to build bridges together. And so this young lady was from another church. Her husband's a vet in town. I pet sit on the side. So really familiar with them, played volleyball with them for years, even while going to another church. And she kept kind of bugging me through Facebook and became really persistent, which is good when you're in that part of the grieving process where you just kind of zombie mode. And she just kept saying, we have grief share. And I kept thinking, like, I don't want to look at people. I don't want people to see this ugly side of me. Cause that anger side of me was, people would have thought a whole lot differently of me if they'd seen that ugly in me. And I kept thinking, like, I can't leave my house. I can't let people see this in me because it'll inconvenience them. People do crappy things when they feel inconvenienced. This raw side of me will make people uncomfortable and they'll change their opinion of me. I don't want to deal with that. I'm just trying to deal with getting up and taking a shower once a week, at that point. And she just kept poking me through Facebook and bugging me. And finally, I was like, what are you talking about? And she said they had a grief share group. And I'd heard of it, but it wasn't something, I'd never faced challenges that I would need a grief share group for before,
What is a grief share group? Is that just because I ran grief groups for a long time. So is this grief share? Is this a grief and loss group where you are together and there's a facilitator? Is that what you mean by grief share?
You're really close. Yes. They actually go through a structured grieving book as well that outlines the process, that outlines the different stages. It also identifies how different personalities would deal with certain situations and how all of them are okay. Because one of the stigmas, and even for me.
Do you remember the name of the book? It's okay if you don't now. If it comes to you, I would love for you to send it so we can put it in the.
Yeah. Oh,
I do like to put, if it actually helped. Did the book help you?
Yes. And yeah, I still have it because I still leaf through it when we have new things that come up that are hard and make me feel like I'm going to fall back into that zombie mode.
Well,
Um,
and we're going to lead into that. I think that what I would love to hear then. So, how long after your partner died did you get involved with the grief share? Was it 2 years?
it took me about a year,
A
actually.
year. Okay.
That fall, actually, that fall, yeah, it had been about a year. And
Okay.
I got introduced to the worship pastor while I was at one of the grief shares, who then the lady that pulled me into the grief share was very insistent that I come to church with her. And I just bawled. I bawled probably the first couple months that I went to church there, partially because it was so good to come back to who I knew I was and that support and that love and that understanding. But the other part of me was so just angry and I hated being there because I was so mad and I didn't know how to articulate that at the time. And again, it was ugly and it was raw. And I cannot believe how people did not even comment or make me feel bad about it or point out that I was being ugly or, they just, every time that I was too emotional, where I think other people would have been saying something inappropriate or telling me to, hey, all things like this pass, everything turns out all right, all things work together for good, all the stupid cliches, absolutely stupid. And seriously, for anybody that's going through grief, I have learned my lesson. I have thrown every stupid cliche out the door because every time I heard it, I wanted to punch somebody in the face. And that was super inappropriate, obviously. And
No,
really,
but it is a common thing that a lot of us
oh,
grievers, when you're
yeah,
in deep grief, you hear the superlatives and you hear the platitudes and you hear all the things. And it
right.
really, it's they're doing the best they can. Nobody knows what to do with grief. And they say these things when really we don't need anyone to say anything except be present. And people have heard that ad nauseum from me on this
Yeah.
because I think that we're so, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say.
I was lucky that that church is so entrenched in just coming alongside, not needing to say anything. They have really great discipleship programs where they work hard to teach anyone who's willing. I mean, they don't force anybody, but anybody who's willing, they try to teach them how to deal with grief, how to come alongside somebody who's different, who believes differently, but who needs love and support regardless of how you view each other. So I was really fortunate. And that's just what they did. Came alongside. They identified things. They actually didn't, the worship leader there didn't really know who I was in the community because he was kind of newer to the church, which was super unique for me. I've been a big voice in the community. A lot of people knew who I was. So it was hard for me to get out and go anywhere without, those cliches coming up or without that temptation of that raw emotion to come up and be ugly to people who knew me very well and would talk about it and would tarnish, my reputation and who I was to the community.
Well, and I
And
think also, and I don't know if you were going here, but I think also that when we have this deep loss, then there's all this stigma around individuals who struggle with various addictions. I mean, people die from alcoholism, they die from different drug addictions, they die from bulimia, anorexia, right, that turn into addictions. I mean, and there's this stigma. So you're dealing with this incredible loss. And I don't know if shame got mixed into your multitude of emotions when you were,
yeah,
reeling from this loss. And then this anger, like, who are you angry at? Are you angry at the addiction? Are you angry at your partner? Are you angry at the drug dealers? Like the
yeah,
anger is all over the place, right? It's just like a big volcano that just erupts and you're left as a shell of a human being, not having any idea how to pick those pieces up. And also dealing with this stigma, and everybody forgive me for what I'm going to say, but we all know it's true. You've got those people out there that, well, they brought it on themselves, right? The person who has died, all of those things make that grief so complex.
yeah. You're spot on. You're spot on. I can hear in the way you say it that you've been through exactly that.
I know the stigma. I know the stories. I know, and I've been in mental health for 30 years. I mean,
Wow.
so
I love that
I
articulation. You're spot on. There was definitely a huge element of shame that I couldn't stop it, that I couldn't get him to stop, that I wasn't enough love to help him be able to put it down forever, that I couldn't save him. I think that was a huge element of shame, that I couldn't save him. Because that's what that last time that he went into rehab was one of the first times I'd put my foot down and said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep doing this. We can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm enabling you. I have to stop being part of this process. And was one of the only times I didn't visit him in rehab that time. Didn't visit him at the halfway house.
Oh, now we've got guilt on top of it,
Oh,
right?
Yep. And it was just this, yeah. And so, I mean, you can see where that anger would come in. Like, did I have some control over this? Did he just give up because of what I had done? Because I put my foot down and I said, we can't keep up this cycle. It's been 10 years. We can't keep doing this. How much did I have to do with, anyway, I can't keep going down that road. I can't keep going down that road.
But that's a real road that people go down. So what I want to know, because where I'm moving in this interview is it sounds like you did some pretty intense work, grief work. That's what it's called. It's called grief work, and it's hard work.
Yeah. I hit a point where, and this may not resonate with everybody, and I get that. For me, I hit a point where I had to make a choice. I could either run to that spiritual connection for me, God, or I could run away from it in anger and in my pain and blame him for what had happened. And, I'd had points in my life where I'd run away before, and had been a painful process because it just wasn't who I was. Like, I have this deep relationship with God and with just any church that I've served in that has helped me overcome things that have felt impossible. And other people have remarked, actually, that they couldn't believe I was able to walk through or move forward in, even before this moment. And I am really fortunate that connection that I'd put in the work to build that connection strong enough so that by the time I came out of zombie mode, I had that decision to make. I could run away or I could run to it. And at that point, I leaned into it. And I said, okay, you're laying out resources in front of me. I'm going to take them, even though it hurts, even though I'm crying every day in grief share. I'm going to do it. I'm getting invited back into a different church, leaving behind my old church that's really painful to sit in right now because of the memories. Okay, then this is the step forward I'm going to take, because I'm trusting that this connection that I've built, this relationship with God that I've built, that these are the resources he's putting in my path. And I just have to be brave enough and strong enough to move forward one toehold for right now and just do it. And like you said, I put in a lot of deep work, did 2 grief share classes. The first one I didn't get all the way through. It was so hard, and it was still so raw. And it was hard. At that point, the church had pulled me into worship, and I started helping out as a worship leader. And it was absolutely transformational for me to come back to a gift that I knew I had, and to channel my grief through it. It was wonderful, and it was good for me to.
So channeling grief through your music, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, which turned into healing for me.
Well, I wrote my whole dissertation in grad school on the therapeutic benefits of writing through grief and loss. It's just another art form. Because
Did you really?
Yes. And in fact, I'm going to be launching a course in the fall, writing through our grief and loss. But my point being is that healing through the arts, I mean, there's so much research to back that up, whether it's singing, writing, drawing, for people who have that artistic flair. And even if they don't have that, you can paint even if you don't think that you're Picasso, right?
100%.
It's being able to, it's an expression in healing through a different venue. Sitting down and talking in groups is not for everyone. Therapy isn't for everyone. And I think often what happens, I had this incredible Dr. Boss on who talked about ambiguous loss. She was a psychologist. And, I think that with grief and loss, that not everybody needs therapy. We can get stuck in it. And I think that we need to know when it's time for help. But other times we're just sad, and we need a way to work through our sadness. And our guilt and all of the other different things that kind of bubble up through loss, and what our relationship was and what were the circumstances of that death. But Amber, I'm thinking about that what you said earlier, that people can run toward their faith or run away from their faith if they had faith, right? Let's face it, not everybody believes in God, everybody has their
Right.
own beliefs, but those that did have faith, sometimes these traumatic deaths can really destroy a human being's faith, at least for a while. And I love this notion of that you ran toward your faith. And I want to pivot to these two additional tragic losses that you have experienced in the last year, since 2021. My question is, did this deep work that you did around the loss of your partner, Jordan, help you in your most recent grief journey of losing your brother and then your baby nephew?
Absolutely. If it hadn't been for that deep work, I am not sure I would be functioning right now. We talked about this a little before, just earlier, but when my brother passed, it was a really difficult situation. It was one of those when it hit the news, because it was a police shootout. And it was one of those when it hit the news, what you had remarked earlier, where, there were some people that said he knew what he was getting into, and like he knew what he was doing, and, just comply, and none of this would have happened. And it was so difficult because my brother was mentally ill. She suffered from PTSD after 3 tours overseas. He was never the same. He had a hard time functioning around people and connecting with them and just talking to them. He had a hard time holding down a job when he came back. There were so many layers of just mental illness that contributed to this situation, that I could see the people saying things like that. And in my grief, because of that work, I think that I'd already been through the cliche things that people would say because they didn't know what else to say. They wanted to feel like they're contributing in some way, even in this totally different situation, even in saying things like, well, he brought it on himself. To those people, and I would not have known this before Jordan died, to those people, that is their way of contributing to this process of working through a horrific tragedy in their own minds, with their own perspective and their own situations, because it was horrific. Whether you're a sister to that person that was just had an armored vehicle driven through their house, and a SWAT team that shoots at you from outside so that you run into the firing squad inside, that's hard for anybody to swallow, whether you're the sister, whether you're a community member in that city, whether you're one of the 3 citizens that were killed that year in a 6-month period by the police, one of their family members. Everybody, I think, that read about this situation was trying to find their own way of dealing with it. And unfortunately, one of those cliches that we heard was inappropriate to us, but to that person, it was their way of working through running away from really that grief of it. And because of that work, I think that I had done, I was able to come alongside my mom, she's still having such a hard time. Obviously, she lost her kid. She lost her son. She was one of those few people that really understood him, could work through his mental illness issues. And at the end of the day, genuinely, when she told him she loved him, she meant it. She would do anything for him, and working through that guilt of that, in knowing how ill he was, in knowing that there had been an incident a month prior to him being killed, and guilt on my part, because part of me wondered if mom and I should drive down and talk to him, and we didn't. Guilt on my part because I felt like I knew when I heard the department's reaction to them being called to his property a month prior to his killing. I texted one of my girlfriends that has been an incredible support system, and I said, and I still have this message, and I said, please pray for my brother. I really think they're going to go back and kill him. I don't think he has much time left.
You said this?
Yeah.
It was just a knowing.
I hoped I was being dramatic. I hoped that I was wrong. I deal with that guilt. Ugh, Susan, it's such an ick. It's such
You,
an ick. I just
you,
deal with that guilt of, could I have controlled more of that? Could I have done more in that situation? Should I have snagged my mom, who was one of the few people that could talk him down, that could talk to him, that could reason with him, that could get through that haze that he would get as a veteran, that just, and you as a therapist, you've dealt with this. I never knew what to call this. A haze was all I knew, that would just build between him and people, and he just could not talk to people. He could not convey what was in his head in an articulate way to try to get what he needed, to try to get to a point of reason and logic so that everybody took a step back and was okay. Instead, because that PTSD, things just always escalated.
did he get help for did he ever seek out help for his PTSD?
He did. He was put on, and this is a whole separate conversation, as I'm sure you've probably seen in your work. He was put on medication that he said made him feel like a zombie. And it made him feel so terrible.
Took himself off it.
He took himself off it, and he self-medicated with marijuana,
Sure.
which after everything I went through with Jordan, I'm not an advocate of drugs. However, I noticed a remarkable difference with him. I wish he would have gone and gotten a card, actually, a medical card for this, because even though the conversations were still difficult and there was still not a logic completely, not a reality completely to some of the conversations, he could, at least when he was high, he could function better. He held down a job here in our area for a year. That was freaking huge. It was an old neighbor who knew him, who knew what he'd been through. That was his boss that hired him and put him in the back of this business where he didn't have to be around people. He just had to deal with our neighbor. And it was huge. It was a huge step for my brother to be able to hold down a job that long and be able to function, with somebody. And I think part of it was that understanding of what he was trying to figure out, what he needed to do for his body, for his mental state to be able to function.
Yeah, and let's just make this really clear. I mean, there's a huge difference between buying drugs off the street and getting prescription, whether that's medicinal marijuana or
Absolutely.
any of the other myriad of drugs that are out there for people who are struggling with mental illness. And of course,
Absolutely.
it really is trial and error until people. I had a very mentally ill sister-in-law who has since passed. And so, it's trial and error of them trying different medications under seeing a psychiatrist, right? I mean, so that they are working with, and I say psychiatry because those are the doctors that understand these mind-altering drugs, not just your general practitioner, but an actual psychiatrist. But what happens, as you just noted, so many people do not like the way these prescription megs make them feel, so they choose to stop without talking to their doctor and start self-medicating through lots of different ways, through alcohol, through marijuana, through other drugs, from cocaine to heroin, all of these different things, and which, as we know, is so unsafe. But I want to ask you something, Ambyr. What I'm hearing from you, first of all, these two tragic, horrific deaths in your life, partner and brother, these two men that were so close to you, and both died in these really tragic, horrific ways where there is stigma around both of those deaths. And I'm sure you said earlier too that people were very divided in terms of the way they viewed that death, but yet more guilt, right? I'm hearing more guilt, more layers of guilt. The visual that comes to mind is this very heavy cloak. And then in the same year, you lose your 6-month-old nephew.
So the next brother underneath the one that passed. So there's 4 of us biologically. This is my second brother, third born, his son, this is his second child. He took to daycare. Actually, they had found a daycare that they felt like was safe in town. What they didn't know was that this daycare would combine with another daycare and one of the adults would leave. So it'd be twice the number of kids to one adult. And this daycare was pretty comfortable doing it, even though I think they'd been cited before, if I'm not mistaken, because that's not actually legal. And they left my little nephew down in the basement while they worked with the older kids up top. And they had swaddled him at that older age. And if you know a lot about babies, they've hit that point like 3-4 months where they're starting to rock and roll over, and you have to be real careful what you're surrounding them by so they don't smother themselves, because they don't have the neck muscles to lift themselves up or the arm muscles necessarily to, if they get in a position, where they can't breathe, they can't necessarily get themselves out. And that was exactly what happened. Was they found him unresponsive. By the time they went to check on him, if we're reading the reports correctly, he was already gone. They went ahead and of course, they called the ambulance immediately, who, my brother called my mom called me. We rushed down. And by the time, my brother lives about an hour away, by the time I got there, they were just leaving the hospital. He'd been pronounced dead, and that there was no bringing him back, and that they would begin the autopsy at some point to identify what had happened. And it was just this horrible, unbelievable tragedy so soon after losing our brother. It was just the whole thing with Sean seemed impossible. It really did. I mean, we knew with his mental state that there was a possibility for things to get out of hand at times. We knew there was a possibility that he would run across someone who wouldn't understand his type of personality or his mental illness. So we knew a rough situation was possible. With my nephew, not even a thought in your head. How many people, how many families take their kids to daycare in a city, let alone in the United States? I mean, I think we're upwards near 80%, 80 to 90%, because we have 2-income households now. That's just the way it is. We're in a tough time since COVID. Everybody's trying to make sure that we're in a good spot financially. So a lot of parents are both working. This was not anything that was unheard of. This wasn't something that either my brother or his wife thought twice about. And then somehow through that negligence, that inappropriate handling, our family had to somehow figure out how to move forward while still carrying the grief from losing Sean.
This is why I had such a hard time introducing you, because
No, I'm so sorry.
No. God, thank you for coming on and sharing. It's overwhelming to hear this story, but what is profound to me is how you have dealt with it. And that's why I asked you this work that you did, this deep work that you did around your partner's loss.
Susan, I wish I would have thought to do that work before the loss, but at least, I'm in my 40s. It's not something we talked about growing up at all, the grief process, or even that you could grieve, that you could be transparent about that. So there was now we have conversations about counseling in marriages, whether there's problems or not, therapy, because it's great. It's great to tackle those problems before they happen, to create solutions before you reach a problem. I wish I would have thought about that before Jordan died, because the people that I let down, the parts of myself that I let down because I just fell away from the world in order to heal. It took time and it took experiences away from my life as I tried to rebuild myself into someone stronger who could move forward. And I'm grateful, as horrible as this last year has been, I'm grateful that I had that work done so that when these hit, I could walk through them better. I could deal with that shame better. That shame, that guilt with Jordan was night and day different than the guilt I'm dealing with my brother.
In what way?
It was so raw with Jordan. I beat myself up for a long time with my partner because I had gone above and beyond to make sure that he was okay. He had to go homeless for a while. I would pick him up from police stations, from the hospitals. I would pick him up from the homeless shelter and take him to to Walmart, to some of the places that where our homeless would go to be warm, to walk, to socialize, and that kind of thing. And there's a whole circuit where the homeless communities, they kind of have these spots that they hit because the shelters close in the morning and reopen at night. I had put in a lot of work in making sure that he was safe. And no matter how hurt I was, I always picked up that phone to help him. And that guilt that came afterwards, because of the decisions that I made in the end, I felt like it was my fault for a long time. And it wasn't until I put that work in through Grief Share in identifying that's normal to feel that a lot of people that are going through what I did, we look back and we look to see how we, in our humanity, could have controlled that situation any differently. Like somehow I could stop the power of addiction. Like somehow I could remove this demon from his life. But that's exactly what I told myself. I told myself that inside me, because I had come alongside him for so long, that maybe I did have the power to stop that from happening. Maybe I had the power to keep him alive. And that numbing guilt stopped me from doing so many things. I dropped a lot of people. I dropped responsibilities. I let people down. I let myself down as I moved through that healing process because I had to. I was so numb. I was so out of it. I fell out of the world because I was broken, Susan.
Yes.
I was completely broken. There was no shred of who I was left. Absolutely none. And I had nowhere to start to pick up those pieces other than my faith. That was the one thing that I knew to come back to, or through persistence. Because for me, and again, this won't be for everybody, but for me, God was extremely persistent at putting those resources in until in my pain, I ran towards it. And that made all the difference, as opposed to when we lost Sean. I knew what I needed to do. I knew not to fight it. I didn't drop out of my responsibilities or the things that kept me whole, that kept me thinking, that kept my mind moving, that kept my body moving forward. Instead, I leaned back into those books. I leaned into my family. I started scheduling more time to spend with my family, to figure out how I could help, how we could help together, how we could work together. I leaned into my church family. They were incredible.
I have to ask you, because we are definitely coming to the top of the hour.
So sorry.
No, my God, please don't apologize. I want to just talk to you for days. The guilt, I've seen what guilt can do to people, and I certainly know what it did to me before I was able to put it down. Through your grief work, how were you able to lay down your guilt? Or was it really, is it too hard to pinpoint because it really was a process? I'm always trying to put language around it because it's so hard to capture. The guilt can be so debilitating. Anger can too. These obviously are very normal feelings. Not everybody feels guilt though, right? I mean, that is not something that is true for all of us, but it's true for many of us. Guilt, whether it's founded or unfounded, it literally doesn't matter because it is a part of our process and it can eat at us. For me, I had to write my way through it. I really had to write my way through it because my guilt was really, it was so real. In hindsight now, through the healing, I understand where it came from, even though I don't want to call it ridiculous because I think that undermines my process, but really, even a friend would say, I don't understand the guilt, right? Nobody has to understand it because it's a very real thing that we carry and feel. So I'm just curious, with these layers of guilt that you had with your partner, with your brother, how were you able to set it down?
First time it was a process.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to let it go. I didn't know how to. That part of my grief with Jordan died was part of what I was hanging on to of him. So the idea of letting that go was letting go of him, even though it was so toxic to me, even though it was so debilitating, even though it was so dangerous for my spirit, for my heart. I had such a hard time letting go because it was more guilt that I was just letting go of what we had together, who I was with him. But through that process of identifying who I was with him, who I needed to be in order to move forward, which was without him, that process, that grieving process of identifying those different parts of it. And then the church members that came alongside to listen, to counsel me, to be in therapy with me, helped me through that process of letting go of the parts of that grief process, that anger that was harming me and harming moving forward with those great memories that I still had of him, and learning to let go of those parts that were absolutely tearing his memory apart of us together. When it came to Sean, it became a choice because I had already gone through the process. I had already learned that those layers of grief that made things more difficult, that made things more painful, that made things more, and I love the word you used, debilitating, in order to continue to move forward instead of just stopping and holding still in my grief. At that point, I had the process down, and it was just a matter of a choice. I needed to let that go in order to honor the memories that we had together with Sean, in order to honor his memory, the good parts of him that we knew were there and that we had experienced, and to let go of the shame that was layered into those hard parts, that was layered into his mental illness, the parts that didn't make him who he was, but that we were hanging on to because they were so challenging to work through with him. I just had to make the choice at that point. And sometimes, for a while, I had to make the choice every day, Susan. But it was much different the second time. I really hope if anybody takes anything from this, it's to find someone to do the work with now, put in that work for the process, because it was such an awful year. But I keep thinking, if I hadn't lost Jordan, I don't know where I would be right now. I don't know that I would be functioning with two back-to-back things like that. I don't know that our family would be functioning, but my family walked through that loss of Jordan with me. And they may not have been part of my specific process, but they had to work through a process of their own on how to be alongside of somebody who goes through that kind of thing. And then it hit us directly together.
It's really remarkable. And I think that, kind of to bring this full circle around the anger, because I can imagine the depth of anger that you all must be carrying around the death of your nephew. And you're in the middle of a lawsuit now, right? I mean, it's not like that. You're still in the thick of it with your nephew.
Yeah. Yeah. Because hands down, there's no question that was absolute negligence and absolutely wrong and absolutely illegal.
So what have you done with your anger around the death of your nephew?
I poured it into my family. Because my brothers live an hour away, we would text now and again, but you know how families are. Like when you live a little bit apart, you get together at reunions and birthdays and things like that, but you're living your lives, especially with young kids. Both my brothers have young kids, and it's hard to travel. When all this happened, I started traveling to them. The other part of me that poured that anger into something I could do that balanced out this horribleness. And I was already in process of becoming a surrogate for a family that can't have their own children when our nephew died. And it put off the insemination about 2 months, obviously, because I needed time to be with my family. But I'm telling you what, I poured that anger into something that would make a difference, and split it between making sure I went to see my brothers at least once or twice a month, and then this family who are incredible. They're the kind of people you hope raise the next generation and will fight for the kind of things that we're fighting for. They are huge advocates for hammering out this process before something happens and pulling together the way that we did when something absolutely unthinkable happens. And so I'm actually about 7 months along for them right now. And it's really helped take that anger and put it into something constructive and powerful.
Because you're giving life. You're giving life. I just think I think this whole story, I just, I think you're remarkable. I don't have a lot of words for it because I think, like I said earlier, any one of these deaths, the way in which each of these have happened is so tragic. And yet here you are, you're surrogate mother for the second time. You are a leader within your church, and you're such a beautiful example of strength and courage. And, this whole podcast is around how do we take the darkest moments of our life and transform them into light, to do something with that devastation, to make this world we live in a little bit better, a little bit brighter, a little bit softer. And you are that. I mean, you embody that. And I just want to thank you for that and for coming on here and sharing your stories.
Thank you for letting me. I hope somebody takes a little bit of hope from this and
Me too.
finds their reason to make the world good and softer, like you said.
So I always ask what self-love looks like after anybody has gone through these traumatic events in their life. And we have heard some of the things that you have done for self-love, but tell us what that even means to you now.
Self-love, oh man. Because I've worked in my community so long, for a while, self-love primarily meant giving to other people what I either had to give or even what I didn't have to give, so that someone else's life was better, someone else's life was fuller, no matter what either of us were going through. That did kind of change with Jordan's death because I was pouring so much out of myself. I didn't have anything left for myself. And self-love turned a little different. And I really struggled at first as to whether or not it was selfish to start treating myself a little bit differently moving forward. But it's actually been really healthy. And one of it's been taking the time to heal, to stop this mantra in my head that if it inconveniences people, I shouldn't do it. If it makes people uncomfortable, I should shut up. I stopped that. I allowed myself to feel, to work through things in my time, and to work through those processes that I needed to stop feeling so empty and as if every time I gave that I was just an empty cup. A really cool part has been the music. Music has been a huge expression of self-love. I can't tell you how I feel like the best version of myself. And I feel like I'm so in sync with the spiritual side of myself when I step onto any stage. It doesn't even matter how small. It could be a karaoke stage. It doesn't matter. And I've got Whitney Houston on, and it's just like self-love. But a silly side of that has been aesthetics.
I love them. They're beautiful. And it's interesting that you bring up Whitney Houston in the way that she died, because she's one of my favorite vocalists of all time. But what came to me when I asked you, and then of course you actually said it using your singing, but what came to me, what I heard was you found your voice. And I don't know what your life was like prior to the losses, but that's what I was feeling, like you found your voice, and here you are using your voice to sing. I want to ask you so desperately to sing something little for us, but is that weird? I love it. It is like something small to end this beautiful, I don't know, just something that comes to you to kind of bring this incredible conversation full circle, because I just want to hear your voice.
No, you're okay. Boy, the song that pops to mind, I don't even know if I remember all the lyrics. If everything comes down to love, what am I so afraid of? When you call out my name, something inside awakes in my soul. How sweet to know I'm yours. I can't even remember all the words, but
Thank you.
Hope now. Addison, I can't remember, but I thought about the lyrics to that song a lot.
That was
You know,
perfect. Thank you.
oh, thank you for letting me sing. I'm so sorry. I have a little bit of a cold, but I tell you what, I would think I would sing regardless.
It was beautiful.
Thank
And
you.
I want to just say that we will have Amber's, we'll have her social media channels, because I think your Instagram is,
Passion for life.
yes, yes. Say it again.
Passion for life. But life is spelled a little funny. It's Lyfe.
Fe. Yes, because I looked you up. Yes. Passion for Life,
Yes,
Lyfe is your
please
Instagram channel.
check it
And
out. I'll have music on once in a while, a lot about my surrogacy journey right now. And yeah, feel free to follow along and see how this beautiful little baby turns out.
well, thank you so much. And thank you, my listeners, for tuning in. As always, I hope that you got a little nugget of hope wherever you are in your life and whatever you may be grieving. So much love to you all. And Amber, thank you.